Ryan, welcome to my show, The America Show.
Kirk, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and today I wanted to talk to you about Austin politics, and I even put down some things like what's happening in Austin, what is local politics, and the reason, I want to talk to you is because you have announced nothing concrete. So I'm very curious, as my first question for you, are you only contemplating and seeing what local politics is going to be like, or are you starting to get serious about entering local politics?
That's funny. When we moved to Austin last year, I decided to make an effort to learn about the local political ecosystem. In part because, we had lived in big cities before, New York, San Francisco, and always kind of felt a little disconnected from local politics. We have lots of opinions about things were going on. Oh, the homeless situation. Oh, the, rates of taxation. Oh, what they're doing in the schools. And I never really found a way to talk about those issues in a more constructive way, or at least to the people who held the levers of power, the people who made the decisions that actually impacted these decisions. And I think that was in part because I didn't really understand how any of that worked. So I got interested in the past couple of years in the idea of power itself and what does that mean? And this was kind of inspired by reading The Power Broker by Robert Caro. Okay. Which is a book that I think probably I
think that's an accomplishment in and of itself to read that tome.
1,200 pages or so, So, I think that is eye-opening to a lot of people to understand that, just because somebody is called Mayor so-and-so, the dog catcher might have some other source of power that impacts what actually happens. And so I tried to understand that when we got here, what are the local, what is the setup locally? Who are the power positions exactly?
Yeah.
Who actually has the authority to make decisions and all that. So that kind of led me to just start reading a lot of local content, local, political writers, and then eventually to discover this program, the AT Accelerator, which was
ATX Accelerator.
Yes.
Okay, that's what you gave.
It's a portmanteau of the acronym ATX Austin, Texas, and then Accelerator.
Okay.
And I did, exactly last week give a stump speech as part of their pitch competition. I came in second place.
Okay.
Which, pretty good.
Yeah, no. Well, it was your first entering into that kind of world officially, in a sense.
Yeah, it was, literally my debut on any political stage, I suppose. To a, pretty packed room full of people who are also interested in these issues of civic engagement and how to be a, better, citizen of the place you live in. And in this place, it's Austin. So that program, was helpful in kind of concretizing some of the questions that I had initially, and also in introducing me to the actual people who hold these positions as well.
Like the mayor,
council members, various leaders within some of the city agencies, the city CFO, people at Austin Energy, et cetera. So there's a whole
network of people with different power positions.
Yeah, exactly.
And influence levers.
Yeah, or at least just authority over, what happens here.
Like energy crises.
Yeah,
when
exactly.
It snows.
What's the interplay? In Austin, it's a weak mayor system. So
weak. WEAK.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what that means is that the mayor is really just he's like the first among equals on the city council, in that he gets to kind of manage the meetings, but it's mostly more honorific anything else that he gets to do because we have a city manager system in Austin.
Okay.
And so the city manager really is responsible for the day-to-day management of the city. And the council serves more as like a board of directors, and the mayor is kind of like the chairman of the board. But the real power in the city is invested in the city manager. So
it's like Rob Lowe's character in Parks and Rec.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, and it's that's relevant though, because in that show you never see the mayor until they
later on. Yeah, the people
until they
running.
make Jerry the
well, the mayor is the joke is the mayor is oh my God, the famous comedian. Oh my gosh, what's his name?
I don't remember it either.
Everyone loves him at the Chive. He was in Groundhog Day. Oh my gosh, what's his name? I'm just blanking on.
We'll edit out this section.
Yeah, no. I put in all my mistakes so people can know. So The thing is, I don't have a Jamie. That's the issue. Bill Murray. God.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So Bill Murray is he's the mayor, but he only shows up in like a couple episodes in the last season. He's completely irrelevant, except they mention him occasionally. The mayor did this and the mayor did that. Now, is that a Texas thing, the city manager thing? Because I think in San Antonio, like I was involved in a leadership nonprofit organization networking group or whatever, and there were city managers a part of that, or assistant city managers, not actual. And I feel like that city manager thing is maybe it's a Southern thing. Like, is it not in San Francisco?
Yeah, this is the first experience I've had with it. The town I grew up in was a strong mayor. New York City is a strong mayor system. San Francisco, the Board of Supervisors, which is their council equivalent, does have a lot of power, but the mayor is independent of that. Whereas in Austin, we call it the 10+1 system. So 10 council members, and those people are elected by their individual districts. Yeah. And then the +1, that's the mayor. That's the only position that's elected at large by the entire city. So yeah, it's not a system I've encountered a lot before. So even just coming here and learning about that, a lot of people complain about, especially the past mayor, Steve Adler. And well, when you actually look at what he has authority over and what he can do,
he just gets all the blame.
He gets a lot of the blame. But really his like chief, power, I guess, tool is just moral suasion, and the title itself, the ability to say, I'm the mayor of Austin and, this, and so maybe listen to me, but you still have to get 10 other people.
So he probably has like the bully pulpit a little bit.
He does.
Right? So he, like when he calls the press, they put the mayor said versus a councilman, and that kind of has, maybe is that what you mean by moral suasion?
Yeah.
Kind of?
Yeah, exactly. And so the current Mayor Kirk Watson, who was elected last year and took office.
Oh, thank goodness you said that, because I was like, I don't want to admit that I don't know who the mayor
It's okay. You don't live in Austin, so it's fine.
Well, I'm in Travis County, so I think they have some effect over
There's
there.
a judge.
There's a judge.
That's a whole separate thing that I'm still learning about.
But I left left Austin for Manor.
But Kirk Watson is more of he brings, I think, more energy to the mayoral role, and is able to use the bully pulpit more effectively than the prior one.
Okay.
So, and Kirk was mayor back in the late 90s, early aughts. So he has some experience with it, even though the system was somewhat different back then.
Okay.
But I think he's showing a different style of governance where, and this is interesting, and just the nature of power, where sometimes it's just bringing more energy to the role. You can get more things done. So he came in and I think led an effort to get rid of the prior city manager, Spencer Cronk, who lots of people seem to be dissatisfied with, but council seemed unwilling to do anything about. And then we had the winter storm with all the tree damage from the ice. And
but you're talking about the real winter storm in 2021.
No, I'm talking about the one that just happened, where there was power went out and people were complaining about the lack of communication. And so it was kind of like the pretext for removing the prior guy. And then they brought in
not the prior mayor.
No, the prior city council. Sorry, the prior city manager.
City manager. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And they brought in.
Was he the city manager over the snowstorm in 2021?
Yes, same guy.
Okay, so like 2 times you lost stuff, and the second one wasn't even that bad.
Well, I think the second one was more of a city issue. The one in 2021. As far as I understand it, I didn't live here then, was a failure of the statewide power grid. And so it wasn't really an Austin specific problem so much.
Yeah.
Whereas
I guess that's true.
The one that just happened was mainly affected Austin and Austin Energy, and was largely the result of trees falling onto power lines. And so there was, I think, some controversy over, the city's tree management policy. We're supposed to trim back branches that pose a threat. Right, exactly. And it just happened everywhere all across the city.
Yeah.
And so people were,
it's good evidence that you're not doing your job, basically.
Yeah. But, it's funny too, because then you have people on the west side where they've got all those beautiful trees who didn't want their trees trimmed because, for aesthetic reasons. And the consequence is that they all collapsed onto power lines and left a lot of people without power. Anyway.
So you're the question is, about your desire to
Right.
get into this world. So you have
a good politician. I didn't.
Yeah,
answer.
you didn't answer that. Well, so like, so one, I don't know much about local politics. I'm kind of, part of my goal is to learn a little bit more. So
Yeah.
all that is very interesting. But basically your story is you sold a business that you were in partner with a mutual friend, Pari Shocked.
Yep.
Mission Montessori. This was a school. How many schools? Just one?
We just had the one in San Francisco.
Okay, one school. What grades was it?
We started at infancy and went up to, through 6th grade.
Okay, so you were CFO at first, and then
Yeah. So so I went out to San Francisco to help Pari get that off the ground. Basically served as the director of finance and operations for the time I was there. So sort of like a CFO, COO role. Just in a small school, we didn't use the title.
Yeah. And then you recently sold that, yes. And you're moving into this new area, this new city, and you're looking for perhaps new ventures and getting excited about, or a lot of your friends are getting excited about, I think, you entering into this crazy world of politics. Is there any like serious chance of this, or is it just at this point still feeling it out?
I think it's mostly feeling it out. I mean, I'm interested. But part of my, I think journey of understanding all of this is to understand how that would actually be possible, and also understanding like what, if I were to try to pursue any of these roles, what I could actually accomplish. And so there are, certain just, I think, constraints to that, being relatively new to the area, living in a district where...
That could be a strength.
I think so. I mean,
you're an outsider.
Sure. But
especially since didn't the last councilman, because I remember the only thing I knew about the local politics is I saw Steve Adler on Joe Rogan, right. And in other places, but I guess I heard that he had gone to San Francisco, been wowed by how they deal with homeless people or something like that. And then and that's how we had our camping problem in Austin, is like, I don't know if it was just him or other council members, but they were like learning from Seattle and San Francisco of how to deal with, the disenfranchised. And that led to lifting of the camping bans in downtown Austin, which is when I moved here, it was still there, November 2020. And when you go downtown, it was really bad, as having lived in San Francisco, where I have, when I lived in that San Francisco area, I would take my motorcycle up there sometimes. And I remember once in San Francisco, I parked my motorcycle, stepped off, and I was inches from human fecal matter. And I was just like, this is crazy. And so I was like, this, and this was like a nice part of San Francisco. It wasn't, the slums or whatever. And they brought that to Austin. They're like, this is what we want. We want this. And, but my point is that, so it's an interesting, you're coming as an outsider to some degree, but you're also coming from San Francisco with interesting lessons and insights that maybe can be a selling point.
Yeah, I think, that's true. I jokingly said we've come from San Francisco to warn you of what lies ahead with mismanagement of particularly that problem, but just also one of the leading causes of homelessness, which is just housing unaffordability. And San Francisco has basically made it impossible to build anything for decades and decades, and as a result, people at all income levels are being priced out of housing in the city, and that does have an impact on homelessness. Although there are other issues going on, such as mental illness and drug addiction, that totally influence that as well.
Well, can I ask you something about that?
Yeah.
So I learned something from a comedian, not Joe Rogan, some other comedian. I don't remember who it was, but he said something funny, and I think there's like an element of truth to it. I just wonder like how you would deal with this problem. Is he said, like, if you look at the 1950s, the reason you don't have, if you walk down any city street in America, basically any downtown area, anywhere, and that's true. Like even in Livermore, downtown Livermore, I saw this, like a little city in the suburban area of the Bay Area, is you'll see just like some man, usually a man, like just kind of yelling at himself and just like screeching, sometimes taking his shirt off or doing something. And it's like in the 1950s, you didn't really see that. And that's because they had insane asylums.
Right.
Right. And it's like, oh, that's true. Like that's where we had if someone started doing that, you'd have a white truck pull up with a straight jacket, and they'd be like, come in, we got some stuff for you. Let's go. And they would put them away. I don't know if that's the solution or like what the solution is. Like, it seems like our answer now is not the solution though either, of just like letting anybody just act, and we just have to like pretend like that's not happening, which is what we do. People just walking around, this guy screaming at himself. Yeah. And it's like, it doesn't seem safe.
I mean, I think the history there is important. I'm not an expert on this, but I think some of the practices of the asylums came under intense scrutiny, and that led to them being, decommissioned. But the consequence was that a lot of people who were mentally ill were then discharged into the streets with nowhere to go, and then there was nowhere for future mentally ill people to go. Yeah. So it's similar to the camping ban issue, which was the prior government in Austin, or the prior council, voted to end, and then the voters revolted and reinstated it. We made camping in downtown illegal, but we don't have enough places for those people to go. Mm-hmm. So you're not solving the problem by these kind of unilateral decisions that only address one side of the problem, which in the case of the asylums was just the treatment of the patients, I guess. That said, I think, we know a lot more about mental illness now and could probably have a more humane approach to that. And my view is that for people who are truly mentally ill and are not able to fend for themselves or pose a danger to other people, there is a role for the state to step in, and similar to the way that states deal with like wards of the state, basically, orphan children, things like that. Yeah.
And just don't give them lobotomies.
Right.
Which is what they would do.
Right, exactly.
Like, don't do weird tests on them.
Yeah.
I think, because that's probably where a lot of the backlash would go. It's like, my wife is depressed, take out a part of her brain.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane, to think about that. Well, maybe poor word choice there, but.
Well, I think what's the line? The patients have taken over the insane asylum or something like that. I think there's some maybe truth to that.
Yeah. So we kind of solve for that problem in one way by we no longer are people getting these horrible treatments, but what do you do with them? Yeah. So there's probably, I think, some role for the state there, in the same way that the state deals with orphan children. But I don't know that anybody's really pioneering that at scale yet. So
yeah, I guess it's not as big enough of a problem. Although I don't know, like it's all just hypothesis on my part, I guess, but it seems like some of these shooters might belong there before if there was a place, because every single school shooter seems to have some pretty severe psychological problems. So it should be like, there has to be a line. Now I understand it's a tricky situation because like every movie about insane asylums is that you have someone who's there wrongly, right? Or like the way to get out of an insane asylum is to prove your sanity. And then the question is, well, what is sanity? Right. And then which is why, some of these movies like in books about this, the fiction about this is an interesting, literary thing to ask the question, what is sanity? And I think that's true. But that doesn't mean we should just negate the question. Right. There has to be some kind of like, okay, we could just let everyone who's within this wide range, but there has to be a line of like, okay, this person is severely damaged in some way.
Yeah. And I think that line probably has to be determined by professionals. Yeah. I don't think elected officials or the public at large are qualified to make that distinction, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to make it somehow, an informed one, drawing on the work of professionals and whatever, knowledge is actually out there. Yeah. So.
Okay. So, I had a quote from you. Oh. And because I brought it up. So this is in a review you did of Ben Sass's book, The Vanishing American Adult, which I have not read. And I liked your review, and maybe I will read this book. Thanks. But it struck me because one, you wrote this in 2017, and now you're contemplating a career in politics, or at least contemplating, but maybe not. Maybe there's two sides to this quote. So you said, and I'm not going to read you the whole thing. It's just like a quick little line. you basically talked about, as a politician, Sass is a reformer and not a radical, right? And so the idea, I think, was he was advocating for very small little reforms to the education system rather than radical reform.
Yeah.
And you seem to disagree in your article with that approach. You kind of made, and I understand, but that you have to have these wide ranging, ideals that you're fighting for if you're going to really make any change. Tweaking along the edges is probably not going to go anywhere. But here we are in 2023, and you are contemplating a career in tweaking at the edges.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, has your views on that changed? Do you think there is value in entering into local politics today?
Yeah. So that's funny you bring that up, because I think my thinking on that point has evolved. I haven't read my own review in a long time.
Yeah, that was November 2017.
But
late 2017.
I think maybe the issue there was the lack of reference to a broader vision of what true education reform might look like in the long run.
Yeah.
And, questioning whether the policies he was proposing, at a smaller scale would be that efficacious, I guess, towards that long-term goal. But that said, on the other hand, I do think my understanding of how politics works now is more nuanced, and that, radicals seldom are effective. Maybe they
radicals are not effective.
Yeah.
Okay.
Occasionally you get momentum, and then you get, a revolution, and sometimes that's like the French Revolution, which ends up, not working. That revolution failed. It ended with Napoleon.
Yeah.
And also kind of a wholesale destruction and death, and anyway.
Yeah, it was a bad revolution. I mean, it was a harmful revolution, but there's a lot of ideas and movements in advance of that, and a lot of sentiment in it of people fighting for that.
Yeah.
In the end, I guess.
So, I think of like a current example. So after George Floyd's murder, the whole Defund the Police movement emerged.
Yeah.
And here we are, 3 years later, and that movement has basically been discredited and has become kind of an albatross around the Democratic Party, because nobody actually wants to defund the police. Like, reform the police, though. Let's get them better training, on how to deal with, say, people experiencing mental illness, just with how to use their guns better, when to use force. That could have been a compelling, argument, but instead the radical argument was, let's just burn this all to the ground. And
well, that's the argument that got people stirred up on the streets, though.
Right. And in some cases they literally burned, things
like Seattle.
Right. Or Minneapolis.
And Minneapolis.
So there was blowback to that. So, regardless of, I think, the actual end there, like that, I don't think we should defund the police. I think we should, reform and professionalize them, but I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. I think the point is, in a democratic system, you're competing with 330 million other people who each have a specific, unique view about any particular issue, and our system is designed to make it very hard for small groups or individuals to force through their worldview. Effective change happens through building movements and making progress over time. So, the civil rights movement didn't just, suddenly, lead to the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It was, 150 years, or more, going back to abolitionism and the rights of African Americans in the United States. And it took time.
And it took leaders in different groups, different areas, like really building coalitions around that, then eventually led to like the Million Man March.
Yeah, but I also think, television helped there. So you had a leader like MLK who was able to do these peaceful protests, show Black Americans being hosed down by the police departments who were supposed to protect everybody. And I think that showed on television just how awful the Southern system of segregation was, and that I think. So what he did was change the white they're the minds of white Americans.
Yeah.
And to recognize at least the basic humanity of Black Americans, that they deserve to be treated with some measure of dignity more than what that system had enabled. And so, so what seemed like, I think, revolutionary change maybe in American race relations took a long time in getting there. And, there were incremental steps along the way, Brown versus Board of Education, which desegregated the schools. And that was in the 50s before that. So,
yeah.
But, Civil Rights Act came almost 10 years later.
Yep. It wasn't an overnight thing.
Right. And so I think, to get back to your original question, I don't think you will be effective as a politician by wanting to, or just as somebody who wants to engage in the political process, by wanting to burn down everything. You have to understand, like, the system as it is, why it's in place, who are the stakeholders in that system, what do they want, what might get them to warm up to your view on any particular issue. And I think you need to think about it in terms of making incremental steps toward your goal in the long run. So
where would you start? You had a stump speech.
Yeah.
And you had a position.
Yeah.
It's your first one, so it will probably change over time, and might choose another position to make your focal point. But where would you start if you, were trying to run for city council or something?
Yeah.
Although you may not go that high right away, but... Or would you get into education? Where would you begin?
There are other ways to participate in the process. Austin has a system of boards and commissions, which council members appoint members of the public to sit on, and they cover any range of issues from, say, planning and zoning to tourism in the city. And these boards have different levels of influence, I would say, but they make recommendations that then council can then choose to implement or not. And so you kind of have a bottom-up flow maybe of policy prescriptions that are coming from the people who sit on these boards and hopefully represent their communities. So that's one avenue. Then there's, of course, the 11 elected positions, and then there's the whole bureaucracy, which seems like another beast. But
I see.
So I don't know. Like I'm interested in this in the long run, but I don't know where it will go, what the actual path to any one of those positions would necessarily be. And I'm not explicitly trying to run for any of them right now.
Not right now.
But
you're getting pressure from friends. Go do it. You have support. You have a little community.
Those friends need to move into Austin from the suburbs.
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't be able to vote for anything myself.
But
maybe if you ran, we would, because we have a reason to. Man.
But the issue that I ran on my stump speech in the accelerator pitch competition focused on land use reform, basically housing affordability, and I still think that's probably the number one issue facing Austin: land use. So how do we build? What do we allow the land in the city to be used for? So this, zoning and other regulations to that effect. Yeah.
So I'm assuming, or maybe I'm wrong, but part of it is part of your plan opening up for more building the land that's there?
Yeah. So in Austin, currently about 95% of the city is zoned for single family homes. Wow. Yeah. And that's over an area of about 300 square miles. So this is a huge...
300 square miles?
It's a huge city.
Is that Travis County or
No, that's just Austin. Compared to a place like San Francisco, which is 49 square miles, or, Manhattan, which is 22 square miles.
Wow, I didn't realize that. It's that big.
So, Austin's population is bigger than San Francisco's by, a few tens of thousands, I think. Maybe
Austin is bigger than San Francisco?
Population-wise, but it's spread out over an area that's 6 times larger, so our density is significantly lower. And so what we have is a very suburban style city. We have a core downtown, but I don't know if you've driven through or across downtown. It starts and ends pretty quickly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Texas is generally more like that. I mean, I think Dallas is a little bit different, but that's just, I think, the Texas way too.
But
it's just spreading out.
It is.
It's one of the perks of moving here.
Yeah. I think policy, though, has not only encouraged, but sort of subsidized that. So one, have restricted what we can build within the core of the city. Again, I live in Central East Austin, which is adjacent to downtown, and most of my neighborhood is single family homes because that's all you can build. But the result of that is that land has become increasingly expensive because, people want to live close to the city center. They want to be able to walk to places. I brought coffee here today. I could walk to the coffee shop from my house. That's why
I cannot.
right. But we wanted that when we moved to Austin, with some semblance of,
I do miss
walkability.
Those days. Yeah.
And but the consequence, though, of my house being only zoned for single family housing is that you can't build anything else there. So the value of that house will go up over time.
Benefits you.
It benefits me, but not really
Not the city.
at the same time, though, because we will never densify. And that means I won't get a grocery store or other amenities that I might actually like
But it needs
to have.
to be like an apartment complex,
Right.
a high rise.
But it's basically illegal right now. And those things, when you take the cost of, say, the land that my house is built on, well, it's one house divided by that cost of land. If you can build 2 townhomes, well, that's 2 townhomes now dividing the cost of that land. You can build cheaper housing there, or, an apartment building, again, 10 units divided by the cost of that land. So that's how you bring the cost of housing down, by building more in areas where people want to live. And, granted, I think people, especially here in Texas, will always want more space. They'll always want the, traditional suburban 3-bedroom house with a yard and all that. And that's fine, but there are a lot of people who don't,
Yeah.
And a lot
and
of
like
people,
to live downtown apartment wise, you're talking, I've seen some people in not great apartments get like a small 1-bedroom for like $2,000 a month. And the nicer ones are $4,000, which is crazy.
it is. But again, it's
For
because
Austin, I
the
feel.
supply has been constrained by
exactly.
the law. But this has other consequences too. So, people at the lower end of the, income scale, can't afford to live close to their jobs. Let's say they're, in housekeeping at the hotels downtown. Well, they can't afford to live close to downtown, so they have to move farther and farther away. And suddenly you now have an hour commute from outside the city to get to your job downtown. And that imposes its own cost. Maybe you can't actually afford a car, or, things like that. So it has I think, a cumulative negative effect on the flourishing of our downtown and the core of the
Which
city.
I agree with. I'm curious about something though. So, because your premise is that we've made it illegal to do this, right? And I agree with, we should not have. Obviously, I'm a radical who's going to get nothing done, but like, my view is to have no laws that tell us what to do one way or the other.
Yeah.
I am curious though. Like, do you think that if, let's say now or even 20 years ago, if we go back in time and eradicate pretty much all zoning laws to people building the way that they want to build, do you think that it would all like make financial sense to do the kind of building you're talking about with density? Or is there something about Texas that why people come here is the spread out nature of it, at least for some groups of people? So I'm saying like maybe there would be a little bit of, I'm sure there would be some of that.
Yeah.
But I don't think it would like turn into New York City.
No.
Because you don't need to. Like part of it is spread out, build more roads and make it faster and better roads, right? That would make sense, so that it would be easier to get places with a car. And I guess like the reason I'm saying this is I keep talking to all these, Europeans and Canadians moving to Austin, and they're all so pro the density. I'm like, part of what's great about America is like, you could just go somewhere else and build a life that you want to live. You don't have to live in this one area, and that's the only place where there's opportunity. And so I'm just curious, like what I think my view, just I'll say, is I think it would be a mixture of both. Obviously, like I think there would be more, and I think there's value to that, more density in the downtown area. I think it's ridiculous that they didn't they don't take multiple houses, buy them up and build something. That makes total sense. There's a college there, the downtown area. I think that's a great thing. But I also think that, the flip side is not, we're just going to be dense and none of the other.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things to comment on in all that. So I guess I'll start with the, what would happen, which was, I think, the first point. If you got rid of well, I don't necessarily think we should eliminate single family. We shouldn't make it illegal to build single family homes. But I don't think we should have zoning that only allows you to build single family homes.
And we agree on that.
Yeah.
Sure.
So if you got rid of that in Austin, you would see smaller apartment buildings, duplexes, fourplexes start to emerge, I think, in neighborhoods like mine. And I would welcome that. I have neighbors who definitely don't want that. But we can talk about
Well, because their house value would go down, probably.
Well, that's the fear, but I don't think that's true. What will actually happen if you liberalize zoning is that I think the value of the land will increase. So the value of the house relative to the land will decline, but the overall value will increase. And it will incentivize over time the building of denser multi-unit buildings.
Yeah. Okay.
But it will make it increasingly expensive to build single-family homes. So people generally, I don't think over the long run will opt to do that unless they're super rich and want that. And I think that's fine if people want to do that. But I think having a mix of different housing types is really important for a neighborhood. You get a diversity of people, diversity of income types. You can have people who are your barista at the coffee shop who can afford to live in the neighborhood and don't have to commute from Bastrop.
Bastrop to downtown Austin? Oh my God. For a barista job? That's harsh.
Yeah. So now,
no offense to baristas.
Yeah, no.
We love them.
Yeah, but they're, I drink a lot of coffee, so they're kind of essential to my my well-being as well.
Well, I agree. Like, there's not enough coffee shops because of that, because you need to have a community of people going there all the time. But I agree with that 100%.
So,
I love coffee shops.
Yeah, but there are benefits. Those are some of the benefits of density and having more people around. Is that there is more need for services, and there will be business people who will then provide those services. Yeah. So, so I think over time, in a freer land use regime, you will naturally see densification because there are benefits like these to densification. That said, Texas is huge, and most of it is undeveloped. I think
people don't even realize how little of it's developed.
I mean,
it's wild.
Yeah.
Just even driving here.
Yeah.
You see, there's nothing.
You're right.
There's nothing. It's all open.
Yeah. The city ends very quickly. Within 20 minutes of downtown. And we've also made the drive from El Paso to here, and just vast expanses of nothingness.
That's a horrible drive. Just 8 hours of nothing.
But
I've done that many, many, many times.
Once was enough.
Yeah. But, I was like a traveling salesman for a while, actually, in Texas. So I sold knives in people's houses, and I sold HVACs and roofs and stuff for Sears Home Improvement Division. And I drove all over Texas, and it's just phenomenal how much space. I mean, if you want to own a big old ranch, and you could do that, and you could even get it connected pretty well to the internet now, so you can have your ranch, and if you like that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, work from home, I think, has changed a lot of options for people. So people who wanted more space don't have to live downtown anymore or close to it, and that's I think a problem for downtowns, which I think could be solved through land.
The way you're saying, I because I thought when I thought about buying a house, my issue was like what you're saying. If I could afford to live well, in a decent sized place, downtown-ish, I probably would. I mean, my only concern is I do love having a dog. Yeah. And so I like having a yard as a nice bonus. But I think that can even be solved because so many people are dog lovers. Different apartment complexes are building different things to help with that. To have the little yards, even at there's one downtown area that I don't remember the building, but the whole middle section of the building is just open. It's like a little grassy area. I don't know if you've seen it. It goes, it's 10 stories, and then it's just this outside area, and that's 10 more stories. I don't know. I haven't been there yet. But I've seen
I'm not sure which one, but in my neighborhood, there's a pocket park, and people bring their dogs there all the time, and they run around, and that I think solves the problem of having a smaller yard. We have a yard and a small dog, so she can run back and forth, and it's great for her. But public parks are one of the ways that we've addressed this historically in dense areas. New York City, where I've lived, is filled with little parks and big parks as well. And And I think that generally satisfies the needs and wants of the people who choose to live there. But I think to another point you said, though, suburbanization in America is a phenomenon that kind of grew out of the post-war years.
Post-World War II years.
Yes. So prior to those years, we were a pretty urban society. This is also prior to the construction of the interstate highway system. So we had these wonderful, big Midwestern cities. If you look at the list of the cities that were large then, it's like Baltimore, Detroit, cities that don't even register. Now. And part of that was the government's decision to subsidize mortgages, which encouraged the building of larger homes outside of city centers. Part of it was the construction of the interstate highway system in the 50s and 60s, which further encouraged people to build homes outside of the city and commute in by car. So, I don't think that was necessarily an organic outgrowth. I grew up in what would be considered suburban Connecticut, but all of Connecticut is a suburb.
That's true.
But my town was founded in 1667. So it's, coming up on 400 years, this century. And we had like a small downtown grid with bigger buildings, and it, back in the 50s and early part of the 20th century, it had a streetcar system. And people would come to downtown to do all of their shopping. And it was basically an urban environment just at a small scale. And I think people, I think there is something inherent in being a human that wants to be around other people and wants to have things within
I don't know if I agree with that.
If you look at the history of,
I think we like other people. I always thought of America as more rural for most of our history. And we did have these urban centers, and then we became urbanized, around the mid 20th century. And then we became suburbanized after that because of all the stuff you're talking about, I guess.
But
I just think like there's also a history of farmer lifestyle, and the all the way back to the Roman era where they're romanticizing like the value of being out and owning your own land, being out away from people, away from all the hustle bustle life. And that's now I'm not disagreeing with you. I think but I don't know that it's like innate in human nature. I think there's a choice that people can make. And sometimes in a lifetime, you can make both choices.
Yeah.
You can live in the youth time and your downtown area, and then, or live there. Like Ayn Rand lived there her whole life. I know a lot of people cannot leave New York City, no matter what. No matter how bad it gets there, they love it.
Sure. New York isn't the be all and end all, but I think we started as an agrarian society. And so living on a farm was just out of necessity, and it was like backbreaking labor from sunup to sundown. And so during the Industrial Revolution, we saw mass migration from the farms into the factories around the cities. But, again, also we're talking about, you brought up the revolution. When we talk about the spaces or the places that, were important during the revolution, it's not some random farm out in Pennsylvania, it's Philadelphia, it's Boston.
Oh yeah.
So the revolution happened in the cities. And I think that's because, again, the density issue, you have all of these people gathering in taverns on street corners who are able to transmit ideas rapidly and quickly. And, that they become hotbeds of revolution for that reason.
I guess so I agree with that. I'm not denigrating city life. I'm just saying that, but I hear this all the time is why I'm I'm pushing back a little bit.
Yeah. I guess what I'm saying, in bringing up the post-war suburbanization of the country is that it wasn't an entirely natural thing. It was largely driven and subsidized by specific federal and state policies. But
we don't know that it would have happened.
No, we don't. There's no counterfactual.
People might have naturally done that, at least
maybe.
Or what more? I mean, we can never know, but what more than likely what might have happened or could have happened is a mixture, and it was probably too much in this way because there was all this government money, government influence. Like governments, obviously, I think we both agree, do incentivize certain actions, and that will, it's no surprise that we move in those actions that are incentivized. And I disagree with that fundamentally. I just, part of it is like a nostalgia thing for me in terms of like a love of car culture, a love of the open road, which was romanticized in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s with movies and songs and TV shows, marketing. Yeah. But to me, that's like the pro of like, go out on the open road. But it goes back even to like Horace Greeley in the 19th century, go west, young man. Like the idea of, part of what makes America special is this like release valve that we have, where as things get too tense in cities for people, or the opportunities dry up in certain areas, like, the steel mills change, right? The answer should be move, go somewhere, go and just get a plot of land and start over. And that's the great thing that I love about, I love city life as well. I think there's something really beautiful about all the life and the energy and the excitement and the coffee shops and the bars that don't close at 8 p.m. Like, that's awesome. You can meet people. There's so much romanticism in there as well. But again, there's such a great idea, especially now with the internet and working from home, of just go to Montana and just start over and build your own community. I mean, that's kind of what happened with like objectivists, for instance, in Austin. Is it was really like, here's an open land, there's some freedom, it's a little bit less expensive. People started moving there, and now there's over 100 different people who are, however you want to call them, Ayn Rand fans that all know each other, and there's like a big old network, and we've kind of built our own little place here. So I think that's cool too.
I mean, I think if that pattern though had centered around a suburban town, we would not have come here. Well, there used to be a large community in Southern California. Yeah. And it was just, Orange County is basically a huge suburb.
Yeah. I lived there for a while.
Yeah. And I traveled out there regularly for work, and, it's nice, but, the only places that are walkable are like the Spectrum Mall.
Yeah. So get a car, son.
Yeah. But
I love my car.
But I think, but
I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Walkability is really, I lived in downtown Denver, and I went every day to the bakery, coffee shop right next to me.
Yeah.
Every day. I would work there for 4 to 6, 8 hours and just have like sandwiches and coffee, and I loved it.
Yeah.
It was great.
Density and, walkability doesn't mean like Manhattan scale skyscrapers. That it just means being able to walk from your house down the block to the corner store or the coffee shop, and which I think was a pattern of Northeast towns that weren't suburbs. My town, as I was mentioning before, had a sort of dense downtown core relative for, Connecticut standards. And then as we shifted from agrarianism to more industrialization to the knowledge economy, that farmland then became suburban subdivisions where you couldn't walk anywhere anymore. If you wanted to get to the grocery store or the coffee shop, you had to drive somewhere. And I think back to your points about the car, for sure, yes, because of because of literature, because of marketing, because of film, the automobile is ingrained within the American psyche. It's part of our, sense of what it means to be, an individual, I guess, or at least individualistic. On the other hand, though, it's also a prison.
A car?
A car, because when you build suburbs around the automobile and not around the people who use them, like when the end is the car and not the purpose that the car is designed for, which is to get you from place to place, you build these neighborhoods that don't have sidewalks and that don't go anywhere, where if you want to run out to the grocery store or bring your kids to school, you have to get into the car. I walked to school as a kid.
Options.
Well, I'm saying the option just doesn't exist. And so what you're seeing now especially here, sure, subdivisions continue to go up that follow the typical car-centric pattern, but there's a growing demand, I think, especially for all the people who have moved to Texas from the coasts who are used to a little more walkability, for more like mixed use planned communities. It's still kind of a suburban pattern, but they build these approximations of like downtowns where there's like a restaurant and a grocery store and, you know, connected by bike paths. And, you know, they look very nice. My mother lives in a similar type thing down in Myrtle Beach called the Market Commons, which has kind of suburban homes, but it's connected by bike trails and roads and sidewalks to this kind of manufactured town center, but it has townhomes and apartment buildings. My mom lives in an apartment on top of a Barnes and Noble, you know, and when she walks out her front door, there's a movie theater and a bunch of restaurants.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
I admit, it all sounds, I love it.
Yeah. So like that, I think you're going to see more of that pattern because people want that. People want to be close to something. Maybe, you know, they still want the yard, but they want to have the option. Maybe they hop on their bike with their kids and go to the restaurant or the bookstore or whatever.
Yeah.
But we haven't, like we've chosen over the past, I don't know, 80 something years, a totally different pattern of growth in most of our suburban environments.
Yeah.
So, you know, it would, separate from, say, like the bucolic agrarian existence of having a house out in the country, which I think people will probably still want. But again, like, you're going there to get away from people. And so you're not going to have much going on. You know, whereas I think a lot of suburban growth is people being priced out of.
Yeah, that's a lot of it.
Yeah.
Priced out, sized out.
Right. Like it's no coincidence that the fastest growing areas in Austin aren't in Austin. It's Georgetown and Leander. They're the fastest growing cities in America. They've like, you know, doubled in size over the past 10 years. It's something crazy.
Yeah. Maynard's pretty much doubled.
Yeah, I mean, driving here, you know, it's just growth everywhere. But it's, again, this kind of suburban pattern. And, you know, Maynard, I also passed through its original downtown on the way here. And
beautiful, right?
Well, you know, you could see
sarcasm.
Yeah, I mean, probably parts of it have been bulldozed, but there are a few historic buildings that probably once were part of a bustling little downtown, and the farmers would come in and they do their business there. Well, but then they built 290, and you know that's where all of the economic activity went. So and so now it's like a car repair shop and you know, stuff like that.
Well, there's like taco trucks, food trucks.
Right. Well, the land is no longer valuable because they built a road that rediverted.
But I'm seeing like they're building like it looks like there's a big building being put up soon in the right smack in the middle of downtown.
Cool.
I don't know so I'm hoping that they'll do a little bit with the downtown, because I agree it would be great to have a bustling downtown. And I think there's enough people in Maynard to make it worthwhile too. You know, there's a good almost 20,000 people here now or something, or 17, 18,000.
I mean, it's growing rapidly.
And it was like 10,000, you know, 10 years ago, 12 years ago. It's crazy.
Yeah. So, you know, I think eventually these areas surrounding like official Austin, the city itself will probably run into each other. But there are these cores growing up in these, you know, smaller suburban towns now where people want a place to go that's local, and with work from home, they don't want to drive down to the city.
So what would be your practical reform as our next mayor to move toward that direction? Because I mean, I make the argument of pro car culture, pro moving, which I do. I think I do believe that, but I also say I agree. I like your vision of having things within some kind of reachable distance.
Sure.
You know, that's enjoyable. Like, it'd be great if there was a coffee shop in downtown Maynard that was a nice one, and like a couple restaurants and a little grocery store. And they have like some little stuff like that, but you know, like they have enough room to make a good, you know, 5-10 cool little restaurants and some coffee shop and things like that. So I don't know, a bookstore. Yeah. I mean, I know they did that in Bastrop a little bit recently. They have started building that up a little bit.
Ryan Holiday has a bookstore down there. Yeah.
I don't know if you knew him or not, but I haven't been to his bookstore yet, but I want to go check it out.
Painted Porch, I think it's called.
Yeah, Painted Porch.
I haven't been yet. But.
Yeah, it looks good. We should all go.
Yeah,
we should get like
a field trip.
And see if Ryan Holiday will say hello.
But I mean, Texas is interesting. Like, you know, it actually has a lot of historic towns. You know, often centered around the court. If you've been up to Georgetown, it's got a
yeah.
beautiful, very walkable downtown with lots of shops and stores and restaurants. There's a theater. We saw a production of Singing in the Rain there last year. It was great, and we could pick up a glass of wine at Grape Creek Winery's little kiosk and or their window, and then drink that on the way to the theater. And it was great. And that's an old city or old town, at least by Texas standards, I think, from the late 1800s or so. And so even in Texas, the pattern was to build a place where people could be. And the result now is that Georgetown, while it's grown tremendously in what used to be farmland and is now suburbs, does actually have a recognizable, real, dense, walkable downtown that's a huge amenity for the people who live there. And there's always people out and about there when you go there. So to I guess to your question, my view is I don't really know what the laws are outside of Austin, but in Austin, it's we need to end this regime that only allows for single family housing. There's this regulation called compatibility standards, which limits the height of buildings within a 540-foot radius of any single-family home, which is suppressing growth in buildings that otherwise might happen near single-family homes.
Yeah.
The city bureaucracy needs to be reformed to rapidly increase the pace at which things get approved. I mean, it takes 2 years to get through the process sometimes for a multifamily building, in an affordability crisis. That doesn't show a sense of urgency. The mayor, I guess, brought in McKinsey to take a look at the system and start from scratch, which would be good. But like in Houston, you can get same day permits. Houston also doesn't have
zoning laws. Yeah, famously.
And the price of a median home there is more than $100,000 less than it is in Austin.
Now, what people argue, though, of course, is that, and this is true. I was in Houston. And I was with friends, and they're affluent friends, and we went out late at night we were going to go to some bar. We stopped at a gas station, literally just nearby, and there were crackheads and selling cocaine. Yeah. It was crazy. It was just and it was a different world. Now, I am very anti-zoning. I think those problems could be solved in other ways.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that's the argument that if you're going into practical politics,
sure,
that people are like, I don't want a nuclear power plant by my school. Right.
I think it's a bit of a stretch to say that the lack of zoning is leading to crackheads, but I think that's probably more of a public safety issue and drug law issue, and that's a whole.
That's just not how people see
other thing. It. But I think, but so much of the resistance to things like zoning reform is fear-based. It's it's scarcity-minded. People can't see the benefits that will come from having more people, and they also, I think, misunderstand the underlying economics. Like to what we were discussing earlier, I don't actually think that releasing zoning will reduce property prices. It will just, on average, allow you to build things cheaper.
Yeah.
But the individual plot of land that you currently have will remain valuable. People will, a common argument is, well, I bought this land or this house with the expectation that it was going to remain in a single family neighborhood, and that shouldn't change. And it's well, why not? Why should you get to dictate what your neighbor gets to do with his property?
Yeah.
I think from a property rights perspective, it's a pretty shallow argument. And I think, there's just an unwillingness to recognize that the regime was wrong in the first place. Mm-hmm. It's coming in, well, when we bought this property, the deed said African Americans couldn't live in this neighborhood, and I always expected it to be that way. And so that would be absurd, but this was a thing that we did, especially in Texas.
Wow.
We had racial deed restrictions that prohibited non-whites from buying property in neighborhoods. And so
I didn't know they put that on the deed.
But if you were to approach somebody in the 70s post-Civil Rights Act and say, hey, people would be like, well, that's racist and immoral, and it would be obvious. But we no longer have the racial component, but it's still the same principle that the initial regime, which restricted the use of this property, was wrong. And so, I don't know, times change,
Yeah.
and to not change is to decay, I think, so.
Is there, talking about your future, is there a movement? Because like you were mentioning, so obviously you can't change, you're not running for the state, politics or anything like that. So having effect over Maynard, Georgetown, Leander, and all those things, which have these downtowns, and I think there could be better downtowns and there could be movement in that direction. Can you be part of a movement of that, like start a movement in that direction? Or, I'm sure there are people who agree with you.
Yeah. There's
even in politics right now.
Sure. There's, we have a very pro-housing, pro-transit city council right now in Austin, probably the most historically. But there's a, an established, I would say, urbanist movement. There's an organization I'm a member of called Aura, which advocates for, better land use, better transit options. As far as I know, there's no statewide movement, but, in other states, there's the California YIMBY, Yes in My Backyard organization.
Okay. I didn't know about that. That's good.
And you're seeing more and more of that in states. I think Montana just passed laws that reform their land use regime statewide. But interestingly, here in Texas right now, we have Republicans in the legislature who have this session introduced bills that would reform land use at the local level all throughout the state in cities that I think, have populations above a certain threshold, which is kind of interesting that's coming from the right, not necessarily, people who live in cities. And they're advocating, or they've introduced bills that would do things like reduce minimum lot sizes, which makes it easier to build houses.
Yeah. They're probably also seeing some of the money that's potentially coming in from business.
There's also this like tension between, the Capitol and City Hall in Austin. Like they don't get along a lot, and the legislature will sometimes pass laws that penalize the city for different, policies that pass that they don't agree with. I think the tension probably keeps Austin from being like a San Francisco in some ways, since it might not do the things that San Francisco has done because it's sort of hamstrung by the state.
Yeah, that's something that like Greg Salmieri talked about once in one of his talks about, I don't remember what the talk was. It was like a panel, but he was mentioning the value of living in a blue dot in a red ocean.
Right.
Where there is that tension that makes it so some things can't be done.
Right.
If we lived in a more left-leaning state, we probably wouldn't have had the rush of people moving here over this last thing, because we might have been locking down still. And that's one of the things that like the governor lifted pretty quickly was like no lockdowns, no mask mandates, stuff that other more liberal places, democratic states did not do.
Right.
But there is a lot of value in like what you're talking about having great downtowns and, that's open, that there's discourse, that there's businesses able to start up and try new things that are wild and wacky. And Muslim, there's a tension that is interesting in Texas.
There is. I think that's led to a more interesting like political climate too than other places where we've lived, where people here generally don't take for granted, I think, your point of view. In a way, in San Francisco or New York, you're obviously progressive because you're here. Whereas people here themselves seem more kind of open to other points of view. At least in Austin, I don't know. I can't speak to other cities in the state. That's, been my experience so far, which I think is good, kind of nice. An openness to a different point.
Just don't go to this campus. I don't think it's like that at the campus.
That's always the case with universities. Right?
Well, this is such a college town though. Like it's grown beyond that, but that's how it started.
Right. And I think that, just,
one, like just, I have friends who love wine. I think you do too, right? So, and they cannot find at any bar we go to anything other than like a red wine. It's just called red wine. And I'm telling them like, it's because this is a college town. It's a beer drinking town.
Yeah.
And that's what it's always been. That's who they're catering to. It's not, if you go to Dallas, you're going to find a lot, or even Houston, you're going to find a lot of great wine places, I think, or like restaurants and bars that also serve some good wine. But here it's like it grew out of this
Yeah, I mean,
bar
that
culture
kinda makes
for
sense.
college
You're
students.
certainly not going to find good wine on East 6th Street,
Exactly. Yeah. Because again, it's all college students.
But I do we go out to eat fairly frequently, and the restaurants we've gone to, I think, have had pretty good.
If you go to nice restaurants.
But they're responding to the changing demographic. I mean, it's no secret that a lot of higher income people have evacuated from San Francisco and New York and have come here, and businesses are catering to that crowd as well. So I don't know.
Okay. So we haven't gotten any concrete if you're going to join the politics. I'm trying to pin you down, but you're not going to do it.
Keeping your options open. Yeah.
So right now you're in a moment of trying to figure out what you want to do with, in the near future with your time, basically. Yeah. And right now you're testing the waters of politics.
Yeah. I mean, I'm
reform.
Learning about civic engagement, how local politics works. I mean, I am working on a couple projects that are more entrepreneurial. One's real estate related, and hopefully there will be some concrete movement on that in the coming months. But, that's a new thing. So
the last thing I wanted to talk about was the book review in the book, The Vanishing Adult.
Yeah.
I was interested in, your thoughts on that, because you were in education for a while. We both worked at LaPorte school. I was a teacher. You were in finance as well over there, right?
Yeah, it was more of like an operations role. So I was helping to open schools and then manage them.
And but you have an interest in education, education reform. Mm-hmm. So it's different than housing, obviously.
Right.
It's not your focus right now, but it has been. And so you wrote this interesting review of Ben Sass's book, which is on Wikipedia. As you said, right? So it's a good review, Nice. And it is a good review because I didn't read the book, and maybe I will, but it gave me some information about what he's talking about. I had read Alan Bloom's 1987, The Closing of the American Mind. I'm finishing up a book right now called Who Killed Homer? It's by Victor Davis Hanson and John Heath, John Heath. And it's basically like who's killing classics, who's killing classical education, why are we not reading? And this was early 2000s. Things have only gotten worse.
Yeah.
Now the Ben Sass book is The Vanishing Adult.
Vanishing
American Adult. And I found that interesting because I agree. I think there's a couple of things that are missing in our culture. And one of them, we could talk about in a second, is the literacy one that you talk about there. And the other one is a adoration or admiration and on any level of maturity and adulthood. It seems like we idolize youthful immaturity. And I'm trying to distinguish here because I think there's a lot of values to youth. I don't think we should just say no, down with youth and youth is horrible. We want to be young and beautiful and virile and all that great stuff. And virile is where you get the term virtue, by the way, from the ancient Greek. Yeah. So like that's, I get the
engorged with virtue.
I'm holding my fist up right now. So there's that you don't want to lose the values of that, but there seems to be a weird, I don't know. It's like just youth is everything. Everything else is just humdrum and sucky.
Right.
Like once you get to that sucky place in life sucks, right? It's just horrible. One example I think of, if you look at paintings 200 years ago and before that, if you have you go to museums and you see family portraits where they'll be outside or something, and you'll always have very similar tropes in how they're designed, right? You'll have the parents sometimes separated, maybe the father's standing over here with a gun, and you'll have the little boy, but he's dressed like a man, right? They're little men, and even the girls are little women, right? There's the idea of adolescence as this 40-year experience right now that it's just I want to stay immature as long as possible, live in my parents' basement. Doesn't seem like a good thing. And, I'm just curious to get your thoughts on Vanishing American Adults. What's the value of maturity, immaturity, things like that.
So since I haven't actively thought about that review in about 5 or 6
Well, what are you
years.
thinking about now?
But I think, why I responded to that book,
Yeah.
and what led me to write it was in part, yes, because I was in education, although, in the schools that I worked for, it was mostly early childhood education.
Yeah.
So,
Up to 6th grade.
I mean,
8th grade at LaPorte.
right. But I mean, when I was at LaPorte, I was mostly only working with preschools and elementary schools, so never really dealing with adolescents or the middle school years. I think part of it was responding to what I kind of see in like the younger generations, the Gen Z. These are kids who have higher anxiety, very negative views of America, a kind of disengagement, I think, with society. They don't drive as much. They have sex less than.
They don't drive as much?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, to your point about, your love affair with cars, well,
Yeah.
they're not choosing to have that sense of independence. Like,
Oh, because they're on their computers, they're
right.
at homes.
Yeah. They're on their phones. They interact primarily through social. And there's, I think concretely though, there's a sense of like doom, which leads to anxiety. Like, a lot of, the climate crisis is going to destroy my world. And Greta Thunberg, right, I think is a good example of this. So I think our education system, our society, our culture has conspired is not the right word, but encouraged, I think, a sense of non-agency in our youth, which I think is hugely problematic. They do not have a sense of efficacy. They do not have a sense that they can go out and achieve things in the world or change things in the world, or just be fully formed people in the world. And I think, what Ben Sass is getting at in his book is that, American children no longer have these formative experiences that make them fully functioning members of society who are able to go out and pursue their dreams and goals.
Yeah.
He talks about the importance of travel in that book, just getting, a sense of what the rest of the world is like, not to, but all these other things too. They don't learn history. So they think that the moment they're in is all that there ever was, and they don't understand how we got here, which then makes it hard to change things because you don't know, similar to some of the stuff we've been talking about, how things actually work. And then you get defeated, and then emotionally defeated, psychologically defeated as a result, and it kind of enforces this spiraling non-agency pattern, which leads to some people sitting in their parents' basements when they're 30 years old, playing video games with no job and no prospects, romantically or otherwise. And this is problematic. And I think why Sass wrote this book is because he was responding to, I think, the adolescent, immature politics of the kind of populist moment we've been in, especially as typified by Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene and others of that ilk, who beclown themselves on a national stage for likes, for, follows, for retweets. I don't know. But, these are people who are ostensibly adults, at least by their age, but who act like children. Like, so,
yeah.
And I think.
But are they attracting the younger generation? I thought they were. That's...
No, but I think it's part of the problem.
Okay.
It's just people who are uninformed about history, who are uninformed about the rest of the world, who do not have a sense of what is possible in their own lives, fall into grievance politics. They fall into.
But it's not Gen Z, to be clear. It's across generations.
I think this is a probably generational, problem at this point. But I think the impact on Gen Z, more just knowing some younger people and seeing this kind of sense of malaise or angst or anxiety up close was more wired, given the education connect. So
it's a curious question for me about, baby boomers, like were my parents like that in their age, their youth. And they were called Generation Me back then. Like they were the selfish generation. This is the time of Woodstock,
Right.
and doing drugs, sex, and rock and roll in the 60s.
Yeah.
I don't think that's any different in a certain sense than there's a lot of existential angst about the world, end of the world, Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of that is just as relevant to them as it was to our generation. I think I agree with what you're saying. My only caveat is that it's not a new thing. It's like maturity seems to happen. Maybe it never really fully happens, and someone just kind of, maturity is not necessarily just that you have a job and you take care of your kids. That's one aspect of it. But, did they ever really gain the sense of agency that you're talking about that I think is valuable? Or did they just kind of say, well, that's life, and they just kind of accepted, they got a little bit older, mm-hmm. their values changed a little bit, where it's like, well, let me just get away from the city and let me have this family and so on and so forth. Maybe that's true of the baby boomers.
Yeah.
It's true, for 80 years now or so. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not a generational historian, I guess. But there was something in that book that I think rang true to me at the time. And, I think we're on the other.
True,
yeah,
but it's been longer.
Yeah, I guess the
generation.
depth, though. Like, can you imagine today's generation if we were, say, like bombed by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor, in 2023, responding in the same way that we did in 1941? It seems like a stretch to imagine that, the guy who's been sitting in his mom's basement for, 20 years is going to rise up with arms to defend an America he knows nothing about and has no connection to. And I think that's the issue, to get to the name of your podcast, the America Show. Yeah. And the title in the book, it's not the Vanishing Adult, it's the Vanishing American Adult. And, what's essential about that? Well, this is a country that was founded on this crazy notion that people have a right to pursue happiness. Yeah. And when you are consumed by a sense of non-agency, you are not going to be able to pursue happiness. You're not going to be able to exercise that right. And to the extent that that is happening in this generation and subsequent ones, then, wither America, right? Yeah. If the current generation doesn't have that sense of connection to the core unique idea of what America is, I think that's hugely, hugely problematic for society, especially as we're entering into this era of emboldened authoritarian governments, China, Russia.
No one's fighting back.
Nobody's fighting back, and
nobody
not
knows
even
how to fight back.
Nobody knows how to fight back with that, with like psychologically, like they don't have that deep sense of what it means to be to be an agent in your own life.
The American sense of life,
exactly,
is kind of fading.
Yes.
I thought during when I've said this in a talk I gave at a Third Thursday, actually, is called "The American Sense of Life" and "Is It Dying?" Yeah. And so I'm agreeing this is very important to me personally because I love American sense of life. Yeah. And I saw it beheaded in 2020. Not just, people being fearful, but I just can't imagine someone, despite whatever problems are happening and there's real, there was real COVID fears, but the reaction was just so timid at first. Like I'm talking about the snap reaction, the emotional reaction of Americans was okay when they said, we're going to lock you down like that. I just cannot imagine in any scenario for any danger that we would ever, especially if it wasn't a literal invasion from an army, like that which is what they tried to make it sound with COVID. Right. And that's the only place where it's like, there was a little hesitation. Because I understand, like, if there is a real existential crisis, you got to do some extreme measures. But it was just, to me, the sign of nobody protested. I mean, it took them 6-7 months of lockdowns to protest, and so the immediate reaction to me was wrong and indicative of the death of the American sense of life, or at least the death spasms or something, right? like they're on the deathbed. Maybe there's some left. It's left in certain realms, but I just saw that as, like Elon Musk was one of the few public figures who said no, which is the only reaction anybody should have said is no.
Yeah. What I felt at the time versus in retrospect has changed given how things played out. But yeah, I think maybe the benevolent view of Americans' initial reaction to the lockdowns was that despite all of the, political problems we have, despite all of the seemingly, populist dissatisfaction with the status quo, Americans still trusted their government enough to think that it was choosing to do this in their interests. I think as things went on and we learned more, the pretext for the lockdowns became flimsier and flimsier. And then, in places like San Francisco, where I was at the time, it was a little dispiriting to see just the wholesale acceptance of it. That said, having been, running a school at the time, and talking to other private school educators because the public schools remained shut down for a year and a half, we relied on tuition to stay alive. And so suddenly we were faced with literally a, existential business crisis where we weren't allowed to have students on site. So, all of us had to, feel imbued with a sense of agency to solve that problem. And so we found creative solutions to, offering other options for families. And eventually we were able to find pathways that enabled us to reopen in May of 2020, a full 16 months before San Francisco public schools did. And we weren't the only ones who did that. Lots of small businesses found creative ways to do things. Then the law often caught up. So we did some things that then San Francisco then recognized as sanctioned activities. It was just like, it shouldn't have had to have been that way.
There were definitely positive signs of that, which I admired for sure. Like I guess I'm just reacting to after the 3 weeks, which is what they had indicated. That's when the protest should have started.
Yeah.
Not 6 months later. Right. That's what I'm saying. It's like they said 3 weeks shut down to get and then it was like 4 weeks and it was like, no.
Yeah, the joke is that, this is the longest 2 weeks of anybody's.
Yeah, exactly. So I can understand like, okay, what you're saying, the benevolent for 2 or 3 weeks. That's how I felt.
Yeah.
Like I was like, I don't want to do this, but all right, 2-3 weeks, I can survive that, whatever. Yeah. But once they went beyond that, I was literally searching all over California, which is where I lived, for a protest. And I was like, I want to protest. Like someone's going to protest. Nobody protested anywhere. The first one came a couple months later that I found, which was, oh my gosh. Well, it was a small one. I don't want to admit that I blanked on their name because they're friends of mine. Oh. Cordair Gallery.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So I went to that because they actually opened against policy, against the rules in Napa, and they got some hate mail. They got some death threats from locals, but they did it very intelligently with masking and things like that. But yeah, I just thought.
Yeah. I mean, there was especially in San Francisco, the climate of fear that would have, even if we could have stayed open, I think most families would have stayed home for some time, either in line with or against what was known at the time scientifically. So when we did reopen, it was very small. But then over time, more and more families felt more comfortable as they understood the safety precautions we were putting in place and whatnot. And we were able to eventually basically run the school as normal, but with, masks and things like that. But we were, operating in an industry that was also considered an essential service too. So, it just the fact that the government could designate certain industries or businesses as essential was hugely problematic in and of itself. And so, I'm curious to see, like, my sense of that all happening, though, is that I feel like people will be less likely to let it happen again. And maybe you disagree with that, but just having seen what happened, like, I can't imagine people just accepting wholesale this kind of lockdown or that kind of regime.
Well, but to what you said earlier, I think the reason for that, though, is now the complete distrust of the government.
Right. Well,
which is the loss that we have no trust that any of the officials have any of our best interests
right.
at heart, which they didn't. And that was what it showed, is that they didn't care. Yeah. They just cared about their own power and, being able to claim that it wasn't, that they didn't let anybody die without doing the most that they could do.
Right.
And that's all they cared about. They didn't care about life and enjoyment and living and building a business and none of that. So I think that the next time this happens, which it will happen again, I think, and it might happen really like in a very dangerous actual pandemic. Like this pandemic was a bad one, but it could have been way worse.
No, I agree. And
what are we going to do then?
Yeah, it's possibly means the next one will be more dangerous because people will no longer trust the public health authorities, who, in my view, wildly overstepped their roles. I mean, I think that's very clear in retrospect as well. And but
that goes back to like the American Agency, the Vanishing of the American Adult.
Right.
Is, what can we say about how to gain agency in our own lives? And one of the points you make in your article that I think is in your review from Ben Sass book is the role of literacy in our lives. And so I've done some shows on the America Show about early America, and I want to do a couple more because I'm interested in learning about, what their values, because I think some of it, like their Puritan values, but also this deep ingrained view of literacy, which was not just literacy as such, but literacy for every single human. Every person had to be literate in their view. And I think that is part of what led to the very unique American Revolution in 1776, because this is not a European value. The idea of everybody being literate was ridiculous. But the problem was that it was somewhat combined with, it was deeply combined with religion.
Sure.
So the reason you had to do this is because you needed to be able to read God's word so you can personally communicate with God. And I think that led to both a opening of the mind a little bit in a good way so that we can give you some new literature and hopefully expand your mind. But it also led to some dogmatism and Puritanism, and that still exists in our culture today. And, it's interesting to me though, that it's dying out. That literacy is, I think it's dying out. I don't know Alan Bloom talked about it in 1987, that when he asked students, what was the last book you read, or have you read a book in the last year? Nobody raised their hand, except to say The Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged, which he just says, no, forget that. But whatever. We'll move on from that. But he does. He says, people will, he actually mentions the only book anybody ever, and then he says, but that's not literature, so let's move on. I'm like, what? Your kids are telling you that they're reading a book. Why don't you start with talking about it? But I'll go off on that rant some other time. But that happens in the 80s. I think it's gotten way worse today. Nobody, not adults read. There's no one reading, anything other than a blog. I call people today functional
novels.
Maybe romance novels, pop fiction novels. A lot of it, I think, is audio as well.
Book sales went up during the pandemic. So, they've, I believe, stayed elevated since. So I think some people discovered or rediscovered a love of reading during that time. But
I hope so.
I think, the trend is definitely.
But I still, my problem is I think that most people are functional literates.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these.
It's enough to get elected.
Yeah. I think a lot of these books, a lot of these blog articles are really simplistic and they don't really make you challenge or think, which is what a great work of art, a great literature, which is what, what I think they're talking about when they say, have you read a novel, literature, an epic poem, something difficult? That's part of what that trains you to do, is to really think and to question and to read between the lines, which not having that ability means that people are just accepting of everything that whatever side that they emotionally connected to just burns into them. And every time the left, if they're on the left, or the right when they're on the right, say to them, they just kind of accept it wholesale because they don't have the critical analytic tools that literacy gives you.
Really. I agree. And I think the connection to the Sass book And I'm sure this is something you relate to since you've taught this, is the connection to virtue, or how you teach virtue. Literature is the primary means by which youngsters, the youth, are exposed to virtue in like a well dramatized, concrete way. In our comfy, modern lives, most people don't experience these epic battles for freedom, or what does it mean to what is the nature of honesty or justice.
Well, they didn't back thousands of years ago either.
No,
most people were just farmers, and they just lived and died on there.
But the epic poems and whatnot then become the means by which these virtues are kind of transmitted through the ages. And so, to the extent that people don't read literature, if they read anything, it's like pop nonfiction. I think they're losing out on that, I think crucial formative experience.
Which is what it takes to become an adult,
right? To
some degree, which I think is why it's vanishing.
Having a full sense of what it means to be the word manly, used to mean not like macho, but more having a full sense of virtue. A virtuous man, was courageous and honest and just, and
there were standards of how you should behave and act and think and
that's
talk
all
and speak, and
gone.
That's all gone. Yeah,
I think of like Frederick Douglass, who taught himself how to read from the Columbia Orator, which was like a collection of works about virtue and democracy and things like that. Imagine going from illiterate to literacy based on that, and then you can see the connection to why he becomes one of the most celebrated orators and radical liberals in the sense of like classically liberal of his day. So I think the direct effect is seen in our political discourse, the way we talk to each other.
Our only solution is defund the police, down with the system, literally. That's the only tool that emotionally that they can have, versus trying to figure out how to improve life, take self-reliance. One of the things you talked about in the review that Ben Sass talks about is all the medication. And that kids are taking for various reasons. And I don't know how to take that. I don't know, like some people say like, maybe they just didn't have that identified 100 years ago and they didn't have tools for it. And now they do. And maybe that's true. And maybe there are that, or maybe kids and people today are just go to that first. And it's so much easier to take a pill than to work on yourself. I know I'm going to get some hate for that one, but
I think,
hard one to balance.
I think it's two things. I think one, our understanding of mental health, mental illness has evolved in a largely positive direction over, the past decades. And I think that's good. We should destigmatize that and get people who are suffering the help they need. Sometimes that's medication, sometimes it's therapy. And all of that should be just as fine as getting treated for a cold, On the other hand, though, I think we have leapt to coddle too much, or we leap to coddle sometimes too. And
it's another book.
Coddling
of the American mind.
We don't allow people to, I think that some of these like anxiety issues stem from this feeling of like non-agency. And so, you can treat that with medication, or you can change your mindset about these issues. And that doesn't happen if you create an environment that coddles first rather than allowing children to be resilient. I think it's coddling, and that's like nurtured. I don't think it's innate. I don't think people are generally weak. People bounce back all the time. This is why we have economic booms following recessions. We kind of work our way through problems. Sometimes the problems are, more ingrained. They are deeper. They need more treatment. But, a lot of the times it's just easier to prescribe a medication than to actually get to the,
But I think people don't want to hear that.
No, they don't.
I think that's the issue, is they don't want to hear it. They don't want to really.
Part of the coddling,
I'm sure, I think I probably have reading problems, actually. And, I read all the time. And I think when I was younger, I might have had some kind of reading problems. I probably had something that could have been diagnosed as ADHD or something like that.
Yeah.
But I never went to it. I just kind of have worked on my own self and tried to be disciplined in it. And I feel like I understand that there may be tools. It's great that we have these tools to aid people, but we should think of them as tools, not as complete remedies all the time, or complete salves or, panaceas that will just solve all your problems. You need to first figure out how to solve your own problems. I was just looking up Demosthenes, the ancient Greek orator, and because I've written some stuff on him years and years ago about, he's just such an admirable person because he grew up in this, he grew up so underprivileged, or he grew up where so many bad things happened to him. He had a lisp, he had, sickliness, and he was not going to, but he, there's a famous story of him, he wanted to be an orator. So he put rocks in his mouth and he would give speeches over the crashing waves to try to, fix his oratory problems. And I think that's what people should be doing to some degree, even if you are also taking medicine. And that's what I think is the missing component, is that, you mentioned agency. I think it's the sense of agency, which you get through a proper education, which is not just about filling your mind with facts and
right. I mean,
figures.
A sense of efficacy comes from finding that you are capable of solving problems, not from coasting through life, right?
Yeah.
So I think, adversity or work is important. I think Sass talks about it in the book too. We have increasingly said that, teenagers shouldn't have to work, and this is an issue right now. There are people.
Is that what people say?
I don't know.
Oh my God.
But,
I started working at 13.
I started a little pet sitting business when I was in elementary school. I printed out flyers and one of those 1990s word processor things. And I had a few regular clients, and then I got a paper route, when I was in middle school. And so I was earning money from a young age. And, but the point is that I had a sense of just how, money was made.
Yeah.
But two, had to deal with problems. Oh, how do I get clients? What do I do with the newspaper when, it's raining? I still have to deliver the paper.
Yeah.
And then other jobs through that. But it's, I do think there's important character formation aspects of that, but just also basic information about how the world works is provided through those experiences.
Yeah.
You can see a path. Oh, I want to earn an income. I have to do X, Y, and Z to get there,
Yeah.
And, if you coddle your kids, if you keep them away from those experiences, they're going to miss out on all of that.
Well, I hope that there's a, re-emerging of the American mind and the American adult. I think it's why I'm interested in education. And I think hopefully you'll start a movement in either that or in housing, because I would like a downtown.
Yeah.
Either one sounds interesting to me. Did you have any other projects you're working on before we wrap up?
That's where I spend most of my energies these days, is thinking about cities and thinking about real estate, and then, politics at large, I suppose. But, I guess with the thing that I'm interested in, where my interest in real estate and urbanism overlap more specifically, is just making cities livable, flourishing places.
Yeah.
In an era in which work from home is decimating the office space, and our cities all across America are increasingly plagued with social problems like homelessness and whatnot. I think it would be a shame if we just had another hollowing out of our urban environment, and instead of making these once again places where commerce and ideas and culture flourishes, not only for the people who live in them, but for the people who visit, the people who work in them. And I think we should have more of that. So, I'm interested in the policies that will make it more likely for that to happen, and that will save downtowns. And that's building more housing, making it quicker to get permits, optimizing for transit, things. Things like that. So.
All right. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much, Ryan.
Thanks, Kirk.
It was an interesting conversation. I need to go read the Ben Sass book, but I learned a lot about politics, and I do hope that you consider either going into that or becoming a real estate developer. That'd be cool too. So maybe you could build something downtown. I want to can we go in on a coffee shop on 290? Because there's like a whole bunch of space there. Need like a great coffee shop. I really want like a coffee shop, restaurant, something within the greater Austin area that is, open to anybody, but also somewhat objectivisty. But not like Ayn Rand stuff, but just like, I don't know, I just feel like there's so many multifunctional things you could do with coffee shop, restaurants, bars, like that can cater to various people throughout the day.
Yeah.
Get people their coffee on the way out, have the work from home people who want like a second space. They could come here. You could even have like little rental office spaces, swank, and then a bar at night.
Co-working cafe bar.
Yeah. Like there's gotta be something new and unique and sexy. And this 290, there's like a college right there.
Yeah.
East Austin has ACC right there. And I'm right there.
Yeah. That's definitely something I've been thinking about. I think especially in the post-pandemic world, one, just because the pandemic made it so hard to interact with people, but two, now that everybody's working from home, we need those, third spaces where people can gather. And I don't know what the right,
I just told you.
Right. I don't know the math on that or anything. But.
I don't know anything about math. What math? Just get it done. Come on.
We'll see.
Just plug the damn hole. I don't know. All right. Well, thank you so much. That's been fun. And hopefully you'll come back and we can chat about your next endeavor.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Kirk.